awareness. Let's start there. Why I think IGLs in particular really need a sense of awareness. What's up, Doug? I really think that to be a good IGL, you need to be not only aware of yourself and what's going on for you, your strategy in the game, what you're thinking about, but also you need to be aware of your players. You need to be aware of their strengths, their weaknesses, what they like to do, what they don't like to do. You need to also be aware of what your coach is thinking about, the game state, all of it. So I think to be a very good IGL, one of the biggest things you need to have is awareness. So we can even start here. Self. Others. Oh, let's be more specific. Teammates. Game state. Win cons. I guess strategy is here instead of win cons. All of these things you have to entertain as an IGL. I personally think IGLs, and to be a really good leader, I think something that IGLs really need to be good at is relationship. And the reason why I think IGLs need to be very good at relationship is because once you become an IGL, once you become a leader, you're no longer playing two-dimensional checkers. In a certain sense, you are now playing three-dimensional chess. And what do I mean by that? Well, not only are you thinking of the strategy, not only are you thinking of the win conditions, not only are you thinking about what you need to do to win the game, and essentially what you're also doing is now you're thinking about the different types of pieces that you have to move. You have coaches who see the game a certain way, that want to communicate in a certain way to you. Then you also have your players, your teammates, and they also have their own thoughts, they also have their own minds, and now you have to think about how you want to move them, what makes them tick, what makes them confident, what makes them unconfident, confident, lack of confidence, all those kinds of things. But to do so, you really need to have a good relationship with them. Because why do I maintain this? Is because, well, have you ever had a IGL that was really good, but you didn't like them as a person? You didn't vibe with them, you didn't like to talk with them, you didn't like to do a lot of things with them, and because of that, like, you kind of were into it, you kind of weren't. But at the same time, maybe even if they said the right things to you, it didn't come out right, it didn't hit right, and like, you just didn't want to do it. Or maybe because they had a bad relationship with you, you actively didn't want to do the things, or you actually played worse because you didn't care, because you didn't like your IGL, or whatever. And so that's why I'm saying relationship. And when I interact with IGLs, like, I take a very relational-based perspective, or relational-based approach with them, and teaching them the soft skills in building relationships with their players. Something else with relationship that I think is really important is this. I think underrated skill of being an IGL, or someone in leadership, is being able to say, look, I'm sorry. You know, I was wrong. You were right. These statements. And I'm not saying that, like, it's easy to say these things, but I think it's important for IGLs to act as, you know, the glue of the team, to act as maybe the stable person, the person that's able to take in some information, that is the one that the sensible one, the one that can see from multiple angles and things like that. And so I'm really thinking it's really important for IGLs to be able to say, like, listen, man, like, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say it like that. I'm sorry that, you know, I said that, or, you know, I made you feel that way. You know, this is really what, you know, I meant to say. This is what I really wanted to say to you instead. And so being able to repair relationships, being able to create relationships, I think this is a very strong skill of, like, S tier IGLs. And, you know, again, the thing that I emphasize with people, with IGLs, with players in general is it doesn't matter if you ruptured a relationship, if there was a break in this relationship, if there was something bad that happened between you and your teammate or your coach or whatever. Because that happens. It happens all the time. You know, we break things. Like, a relationship's broken, you say the wrong thing, you're maybe angry, maybe tilted, and, you know, it doesn't come out right or whatever. Or maybe you even meant it and, you know, whatever. And because of that, there's a rupture in the relationship. But it doesn't really matter if there's a rupture in the relationship. What's more important is, can you come back and can you repair it? Can you come back to that person and say, like, look, man, I see what you're saying. You know, I'm sorry. This made me really upset when XYZ. This is what I was trying to do. You know, how can we work this together? Because, you know, the metaphor that I often talk to people about is like when you break your arm, right? Say you break your arm here and you go to the doctor or you don't. And, like, the doctor says, okay, well, you know, it's broken. They maybe, like, shift it in place and put it back in. And then they put a cast around it, right? And, you know, typically what happens when you break a bone is that in that place where it broke, it's, well, I guess, what do you think? Is it stronger or weaker than, you know, originally where it was? And typically, it's stronger. You know, your body's amazing. And in that place that your bone broke, you have things that, like, you know, make that repair to make sure that it doesn't break in that same spot again. And so here's the other thing, fun fact, just like breaking bones or whatever, if you didn't, say you broke your bone, right? You snapped your arm and you're like, you know what? You know what? I don't want to go to the doctor. I don't want to go to the doctor. I don't have health insurance. I don't want to go. It's painful or whatever. And you don't go to the doctor, right? And so it heals all messed up. And so maybe instead of a straight line or a straight wrist, now it's kind of like crooked and bent and whatever. And, you know, it heals improperly. Unlucky. So it heals improperly. You have this weird club arm or whatever. And, like, eventually you just get used to kind of like using this broken arm in a certain way. It's not efficient. You know, it's not optimal, but it's healed. And so, you know, if a doctor is going to see your arm, they'd be like, let me see. And you're like, here it is, this claw thing. And they're like, oh my God, like, your arm, you know, that it's, like, messed up. And you'd be like, yeah, but, you know, like, I got used to it. Like, this is the way I like it. This is the way it is. And, I mean, just like how we talk about relationships, like, sometimes it happens, right? There's ruptures in the relationship. There's breaks in the relationship because we go in the next day, we pretend it's fine, and we don't talk about that thing, or we just, like, swoop it under the rug. It may seem outwardly that the relationship is fine or it's fixed, but in reality, it's this, like, broken, crooked club thing that, like, we learned how to deal with, but, like, there's still some underlying things in there that's not really good. So what happens, though, if you bring this to the doctor, you know, what do they say to you about your hand? They say, you know, unlucky, your hand's kind of messed up, and if you want full optimal functioning of this hand, what we're gonna do is we're gonna have to re-break it. What? That's right, we're gonna have to re-break your bones so we can set them straight. And so after we re-break them and it heals, it's gonna be straight, it's gonna be optimal, it's gonna be more functional for you. But how often do we not want to go back and do the hard work of, like, breaking and going back in and the apologies, and now it feels even doubly worse or even some more awkward because we're talking about that time in the past that we did these things. So again, I think IGLs, I think people, I think, you know, functional teammates or leaders are the ones that are able to not only create relationships and maintain them, but at the same time, they are able to repair relationships and come back to each other, to come back to players or, you know, their teammates to say, I'm sorry, to say I was wrong, that you were right, or, you know what I'm saying, or whatever, to create this context, to create this conversation, to create the culture of the team, to create the bonds between the team. I think this is, you know, really, really important. Another quality that's super important for an IGL or a leader too is the depersonalization of wins and losses. And what I mean by this is, like, I'm not saying don't take responsibility for the loss, don't, take pride in the win, don't, try hard or what have you. What I'm saying is that it's important for IGLs to understand that they're not the win or the loss. They're part of the process. And I think what happens is, typically IGLs, leaders, they get into this position because, they have high value on what's happening. They have a high sense of responsibility. They have a high sense of ownership. And all of these things are great. Let me write these other qualities down. I'll start with ownership. These are all great to have. But what happens, or what I've noticed, is if IGLs take too much responsibility, take too much ownership of everything, they're not considering the things that are not in their control. And because they're not considering the things that aren't in their control, it just leads them to feel bad. It leads them to feel terrible. It leads them to, maybe get tilted or upset at their teammates because they can't control everything. I think it's really important for IGLs to understand what is in their control, what is in their realm of influence, and at the same time, what is outside of their control. Maybe this goes along with awareness. Maybe this goes along with, depersonalization, what have you. But I think it's important to understand the points of control, out of control, and influence. Because these three things, control, influence, and things out of your control, are so important for you to understand. It's so important for you to understand because when you're in game, you can, as you're IGLing, as you're creating a game plan, as you have the strategy, you now can be better at assessing, okay, was it something in my control as an IGL I should have called? I should have said these things. I should have communicated these things. I should have practiced these things. Or is it, oh, okay, I did my best as an IGL, fulfilled my role. I did my responsibilities. And now it's up to my teammates to do their jobs, play their roles, do the things that they need to do on this team. And, that if that's true, then you're able to let that go. You're able to, see where the limits are of yourself. And at the same time, it's also really important to understand your points of influence. Because why is influence really important? Is because although it's somewhere in between of control, like it's kind of control, it's kind of not. Because, for example, I may have pure control over, how I think, how I feel. Not always. I mean, we're talking about, most of the time. But, if you're able to, have control over certain things or understand what are some, things that you have control over, that's great. At the same time, you may not have complete control over the game state. You may not have complete control over what your teammates do. You may not have complete control over what people say or how they respond to you, but you do have influence over it. And what I mean, so you may not be able to control your teammates, but it is totally within your influence to talk with them, how you talk with them, what you talk to them about, in what context do you talk to them? Do you want to talk to them before practice, after practice? Do you want to sit with them, during practice, during VOD review? All of these things are in your influence. You may not influence how they feel or how they respond, but depends on how you talk with them or what have you, you can influence the situation. You may not be able to win the round at the same time. You may be able to put your team or say those things that you need to put them in a better spot. So you have influence over your situation, but not necessarily complete control. Yo, welcome to the string, dang iOS. Welcome. Okay, also, my goal is to hopefully maintain the sexy sick voice with the coughing because I feel it coming on. All right. So again, this also, depersonalization, awareness, this all goes together. Because again, all of this stems from how aware are you as an IGL of what is going on. Not just for yourself, but for the game and for other people. I think another thing that's really, really important for IGLs is their ability to recognize improvement. Because I think high performers, all the time, people have high ownership of things. They are really good at picking out the things that we're not doing so good at. They're really good at picking out mistakes, really good at seeing the flaws in what's happening, really good at seeing, bad patterns of behavior in general. And so I think what's really, really important as an IGL is to do the opposite. Oh, Matthew, what's up, baby? Makes sense. ISO. Makes sense. And so I think what's really important is your ability to find how we're getting better, how we're improving. This is going to also improve relationships. This is also going to protect motivation. I'm not necessarily saying you gotta be fake positive of like, oh my god, everything we're doing is amazing and we're going in the right direction. No. That's not what I'm saying at all. Because if you're actually good to like gas people up with fake positivity, then it doesn't give you good data. But instead, finding those small little things, those small step forwards that your team is making, that you're making, the progress, that is really, really important. And why it's especially important for IGLs is because, again, high ownership, high responsibility. Responsibility goes over here. High responsibility, all these things sometimes leaves them more exposed, more open to becoming tilted, for getting upset, for getting in their own way, or just being surrounded with all the negatives and the mistakes instead of actually seeing how the team is improving. And if you're able to see how they're improving, you're also able to provide something so key: positive reinforcement. Everybody loves positive reinforcement. Nobody doesn't like positive reinforcement, and positive reinforcement goes a long way. And why does it go a long way? Because it's your recognition that you're getting better. It's the recognition that somebody else is getting better. And it's through this, wow, you see me? You actually notice what I'm doing? You actually notice I'm trying? It's through these moments of communication, of actually highlighting. And here's the thing too. How good are you at seeing how well you're doing? Maybe you're playing games and you're trying to improve, but how well are you at actually picking out, oh, I'm getting better at this. I didn't mess up this one time, or I'm actually going in the right direction. It's so hard for us to do. But how awesome is it? How great is it? How sometimes somebody else can say, wow, I really see that you're improving. I really see that you're putting in the time. I really see that you're, asking questions, or you're spending time after practice, or you're doing the things that you need to do to get better. And just through that recognition, you're like, wow, I am doing it. I'm getting better. Wow, that's kind of true. I'm going in the right direction. In the same way, as an IGL, you're that person. You could be that person of seeing other people's improvements, of helping them go in the right direction, and recognizing someone else's improvements also builds relationship. Wow, this person is really taking interest in me. They actually watch and observe and they're listening to me. That's great. If there's good relationships, that also allows you to understand, who they are as people, what problems they might be having, all those kinds of things. Another trait I think is super important for an IGL to have: communication. I know that we're talking about a little bit. Communication also goes with relationship. It also goes with recognizing improvement. All these things are tied together. So, why this is important is understanding how to communicate. And why is it important to understand how to communicate? Is because each person communicates a little bit different. Each person, on the same hand, listens a little bit differently. And to make sure that as an IGL that you are communicating, you're allowing others to see what's in your beautiful brain of yours for strategy or whatever, it's important that you understand how to communicate. Okay. And another important part, I think, about communication is your ability to ask questions. And because if you think about it like this, something that I love to work with people on, or something that I like to do in my work, is I love to guide people. And not like trap sell or like trap guide of like, oh, I want you to go there. I'm gonna ask these questions, these leading questions, and aha, see, I knew it. That's where I was going. No, that's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is if you have good question ability, or you have good questions to ask, or things that you're wondering, or things that you're thinking, you can use questions to, one, get information about how this person is thinking, why this person is thinking, when is this person thinking. You can better understand their perspective, maybe have more empathy for the mistakes that they're making, or maybe there's a flaw in their thinking, or maybe they're thinking something else. Or you can help guide other people to your own thoughts, depending on, what they're thinking, or why you want to guide them there. At the same time, you just ask, because I think too, oftentimes we get stuck in our own head. We have our own assumptions. We have our own thoughts about stuff. But what's important for an IGL to lead well, to guide, is to understand where their team is, why their team is, and how they can influence their team to go somewhere else. So we can do this through open-ended or closed-ended questions. Very simply, open-ended questions are questions that can be answered with more than one word, and closed-ended questions are one-word answers. So, you can mix these types of different questions to guide, to explore, to understand, to affirm, where these people are. This is especially useful when people are, giving you one-word answers like, what do you think? Yeah. Do you agree? Mm-hmm. Or what do you think? I'm not sure. I don't know. And so, in my experience, yes, no, I don't know, whatever. Like, these words, these things often have a lot of different meanings. So, if that's true, it's important for you as an IGL to understand, what does someone mean when they say yeah? Or what does someone mean when they say I don't know? Because, for example, I don't know could mean I literally have no idea. I've never thought of this before. I don't know could also mean, wow, this is a very uncomfortable conversation and I just want it to end. I don't know. I don't know could mean I want to figure out what you're thinking so I can give you what you want to hear because I'm very nervous and anxious. I don't know. So, again, I don't knows could mean a lot of things. Yeses, again, could mean a lot of things. Yes, I want to get the fuck out of this conversation. I want to stop talking. Yes, I want to agree with you because I don't like this and I feel like we're fighting. Yes, I don't care. So, what does yes mean? What does I don't know mean? What does no mean? And all of these things you can ask and have full freedom to ask these types of questions. Another quality I think is really important for IGLs to have is the ability to observe and find the patterns. If you think about it, esports is all about patterns. There's a ebb and flow of the game. There is, consistent things that happen in the game. There are tells, there are reads, there are patterns that you can pick out where if you actually pay attention to them, you can have foresight into the game of how it's going to play out or what even the enemy is going to do or what you want to do effectively. So to be able to understand the patterns in the game and pick them out, to analyze them, to see what they mean or to draw conclusions for them, very important. At the same time, patterns happen all the time within your team, within different people. They say things. They use different words. They shut down in specific ways. They give you good facial expressions. You can tell when they're tilted, what leads to their tilt. All these things are really important for you to understand in being observant. So we're talking about patterns. We're talking about behaviors. We're talking about even thoughts and thought patterns. This is what we're talking about, being able to pick these things out and understand them and be very observant of when they're happening. Super important. If you really want to be a good IGL, it's about being observant. Not about just the game observant, but again, about the people, about everything. Can you see the patterns that happen, that reoccur commonly? And then, once you notice the patterns, how do you manipulate the patterns? What do you do with the patterns? How do you use these patterns to help lead, to help guide, to help influence the team, game, people around you. Because again, we're playing 3D chess instead of checkers as an IGL. And again, we're not talking about skills, right? I'm not talking about, oh, if you're an IGL, you need all the in-game skills. Yeah, that's true. You do need to be very smart. You do need to be very creative. You do need a good handle on the basics of the game. These things are all very true. At the same time, when I'm talking about an IGL, I'm talking about the X factors. I'm talking about the things besides the game stuff that make the difference between a good IGL and a great IGL. At the same time, I think it's really important that they hold people accountable. All right, but at the same time, I'm not saying, like, be a dick about it. What I'm saying is holding people accountable as in, hey, we agreed upon this. Hey, man, we said we're going to, you know, play like this. We said that we're going to communicate like this. We said we're going to, you know, try to win together like this. What's happening? I don't get it. I don't understand. You know, how can I help you do these things? How can I support you in doing these things? And I think sometimes it's uncomfortable to do these types of things. I think it's really uncomfortable to sit to not feel like you're pushing somebody, but at the same time, learning how to support somebody in the way that they want to be supported. At the same time, sometimes as an IGL, that may not be the typical things that you do. Maybe sometimes, like, you think, okay, you know, as an IGL, I work my ass off. I do the things I need to do. I really spend extra time. I watch VOD. I play extra games. At the same time, like, nobody else is doing the work. What am I supposed to do? You know, how am I supposed to, you know, work with these people if they're not also putting in the same amount of effort as I am? I don't want to hold their hand. That's just not something I do. Fair. It may not be. At the same time, this is your team. You know, you have a sense of responsibility for this team. And what are you willing to do to help, to support? Because, yeah, we can sit here and say, like, yeah, it's not my job to do these things. At the same time, whose job is it? Yeah, it's someone else's job. But at the same time, like, how can you help and support them? It's going to take extra time. It may take extra, you know, effort from you in a different way that you may not feel comfortable in. But at the same time, if you put that effort in, if you choose to see how you can support your team, if you put the ball in their court, it's no longer up to you and it's up to them. Plus, I'm thinking that if you do these types of things, ask these kinds of questions of how can I support you? What can I do differently to help you? You know, what can I do to, you know, make us better as a team? I think if you were actually to take that time and spend that little extra effort, even though it might be weird, it might be awkward, and yeah, here's the thing, even if you do this, it may not make the other person play harder or whatever, but if you're actually able to do this and take this relational approach, my guess is that they probably would be more likely to do the thing because they see that not only are you putting in effort, but you're putting effort into them. And sure, maybe they're not going to get it the first time. Maybe they're not going to get it the second time or the third time or whatever. At the same time, if you're able to hold people accountable for what they say they're going to do, if you're able to hold people accountable and help them create their own plan or sit with them as they do it, it might help. It probably will help. But at the same time, I'm not saying be a dick.